Hey folks, Jesse here. We've been locked up all day because it's been cold lately. Really, really cold. But today seems like a good day to talk about honorable mentions that were left out of my top 10 from a few days ago. Also talk about honorable mentions from the 2021 list and also games that have left the 2021 list and didn't make it to my 2024 list. I know, it's a lot of numbers, but it's cold. We have nowhere to go. Let's talk about some board games. I know we've done this before, the board game cleanup, but legitimately we just had a board game day with 10 to 15 people here. It was a super fun day, and I'm going to tell you how to host your own board game day in a future video, so come back and subscribe for that. But right now, you're going to help me clean these up while I tell you about the games on my list. Some of these are empty boxes. Some of these are boxes that aren't games, but they have game components inside. I have to figure out what to do with those. And then some of these are expansion boxes, which are probably empty at this point. But let's clean them up while I talk about some games that used to be on my top 10 list. Glux, or Glux, was number 8 on my top 10 list before. It's still one of my favorite abstract games. It does what a 2-player game does, but it's made for 4 players. It's easy to teach, it's not too boring looking, but it left my top 10, and I still really like it. I think I can get back on my top 10 list if it maybe got a facelift, a deluxe edition, a deluxe edition. No, cut that out. But if it had better graphic design and maybe deluxe acrylic pieces, I could see it getting back onto my top 10. But for now, it's not going to be there, but I don't even know what it would replace if it did get back in my top 10. I have to think about that one. The next game on my list, Lights, is regarded as one of the best hidden movement games and has been for quite some time, and it's still one of my favorite hidden movement games. The game is Letters from Whitechapel. It's a game of hidden movement where one player plays Jack the Ripper, hiding their moves from the other player onto a sheet of paper. Mountain Goats is one of Melissa's favorites, so I can't keep this hidden in the closet. Let's take it out there. All of the other players are the police responsible for catching Jack before Jack strikes again. I really like this game. It's a hidden movement game that doesn't overcomplicate things. There's enough there to keep it exciting and interesting, but I think it left my top 10 because sometimes when I'm playing Jack, I feel like the police don't have enough to do. Or it eventually gets to a point where the police just hit a dead end. And it can be frustrating in a game when it's not even close. I feel like the police players are just waiting for it to end. And maybe that's because they're new or they didn't really have a strategy going on. Or maybe it's just slightly unbalanced to favor Jack. And there are rules in place, but I really haven't had much success with them. But if you have, I would love to hear that. Tell me about it so I can fix this game and bring it back to my top 10. Now these games, or at least some of them, are some of my new favorites. None of them that I'm going to cover in this video, but I really like a lot of these. But while I drop these off, let me tell you about the biggest drop off on the list so far, and that's Mansions of Madness. Went from number 4 to not even being on my top 10 at all. In Mansions of Madness, players are called to a location with a random goal, for example, solving a murder. Cooperatively, they help each other discover clues and backstory until they succeed. Or the world comes to an end and all the players accidentally unleash Cthulhu, which is a loss. This game is captivating for any player who hasn't played it before, or at least many times. I've had times where I've played it again, replaying something that I've played before. They have scenarios in the game. And I just had to stay quiet while the other players enjoyed it more than I did because I knew what the outcome was. And they have ways to change it to where it's not exactly the same every game. But after a while, it plays the same, and I knew how it was going to end, at least that particular time. And that's just one reason why Mansions of Madness is no longer in my top 10. But when I jump into a new scenario, this game is a great time, and I'm back to having fun again. But to get a new scenario, I need expansions, and expansions are expensive. And once you have the expansions, storing them is an issue. Storing everything in this game, it's all over the place, and it causes madness. Not the good kind of madness. I store all of my games in color order. So what color is this? This is one of Melissa's favorite games. It's also on BGA. I'm making a video with my top 10 BGA games and also my top 10 sleeper hits on BGA. This might be one of them, but check that out later, so make sure you subscribe. I think this is going to have to go in the closet for now, though. Good a spot as any. I think we're making a dent in it. Here's a box with my address on it. Probably shouldn't put that in the video. But other than that, I mean, I know where a lot of these things go. And some of these are empty boxes. But let's go ahead and talk about what was number 9 last time I did a top 10 that's no longer on my list. And I don't think it will be even in the top 20, which is odd. I think what had happened was Clank In Space, which was my number 9, is no longer on my list because at the time we had just gotten the expansion for it, which really improved the gameplay of it. But you know, like most games, they just fade away after a while, and you just don't get them played much anymore. Recently, other people have been playing Clank In Space, and I'm happy to see it played. I started to have issues with it, down to the graphic design of it and just overall favoring the regular Clank after playing Clank Legacy. Well, I think it's official. I am out of space. What do you do? If you run out of space, do you make more shelves? I don't want to make more shelves. Do I sell some board games? I've sold some board games before, but it's kind of a pain. Let me know if you have any tips for me on how to reduce this. I'm starting to understand why I left all these games out. I just don't have room for them. I'll find a spot somewhere. But those games that I just talked about, those were the games that have left my top 10. If you haven't checked out my top 10 yet, I did update it for 2024. But if you haven't seen it yet, it is on this channel. Make sure you subscribe, check out that video, because I plan on updating it every year moving forward. But for now, let's quickly talk about the honorable mentions I had in my 2021 version of my top 10. Silver and Gold is a Phil Walker Harding game that currently lives in my little case. But I think since then, of the Phil Walker Harding games, praise be, the game that's replaced it for me is Super Mega Lucky Box. If you haven't tried that, it is available on Board Game Arena if you want to give it a try. It's a game you can just jump in and grab if you like Silver and Gold. Codenames is another game that was on my honorable mentions. I actually prefer Codenames Duet overall, but we have some of them here and the original in that tiny box I just mentioned. But Codenames it's like a song that you discover that you're really into and you're like, that's my jam. And then someone else discovers it and they're like, that's my jam. And you're like, that's cool. And then soon enough, you start hearing it on the radio. You start hearing it in the supermarket. You start hearing it everywhere. And then your jam, you're just kind of tired of it now. That's Codenames. It's a very good jam, but you're just kind of tired of it. The burnout, the overexposure. It has a nice online implementation. But once again, I think I'm just burned out on it for a little while, so I'm going to take a break from it. Still a great game. Now let's move on to a board game that doesn't get enough exposure, which is Ultimate Railroads, which was Russian Railroads on my other list. This game, I can't get it to the table. There's so much stuff in this box too. Russian Railroads is my favorite of the railroad systems, but they're all in here for a high price tag. I can't even get people to join the BGA game. So I'm at HeartBoardGames on Board Game Arena if you want to play some Russian Railroads. I'm probably rusty at it at this point, or Ultimate Railroads. But that's on my, or was once on my honorable mentions list. I still really like the game though. Smartphone Inc. is another game that was on my honorable mentions list back in the day, and probably still would be. It's a great game, but it's an odd theme. Not many people are clamoring to buy the latest cell phone salesman game. As odd as that theme is, it's still a really fun game. Still probably an honorable mention, but some reason, every time I play it, I always get a rule wrong. And that's not a reference to anything. If you've seen any of our playthroughs, something's wrong. I would keep picking up games, but I'm out of room, so I guess I'll just be talking to you at this point. Maybe Smartphone Inc. didn't have what it takes because of that theme, but theme, components, time to set up, all of these factors were very important in crafting my top 10. But here's 5 games that didn't quite slide into my top 10 this year, otherwise known as the honorable mentions. In Thunder Road Vendetta, you're racing to a finish line, but that line doesn't show up till someone is out of the game. It's a racing game, but more of a dudes on a map game because you'll be eliminating the other players. For as quick as the game is, the theme tells me it should be even faster and more chaotic. The dice can cause a great deal of havoc, but I wonder if they went the Gloomhaven route and had a stack of cards, how that would play. Who knows? That's not for me to decide, but the dice can be something that slows down the game, and AP can be a factor in pulling this game out of my top 10. But maybe you will say, well, that's maybe my fault, or the players I play with, their fault. Okay, but we're talking about my top 10, and if I'm playing with people that have analysis paralysis, it turns what would be a fast race into a traffic jam. I'd like to see some sort of mechanism that speeds up the players by benefiting the other players or something like that. Either way, I'm excited to play the Chrome version with some players that maybe don't have AP. But when it comes to racing, there's only one game for racing, and that's Heat, Pedal to the Metal. There's a track, and each player has a small deck of cards, and you're playing cards equal to your gear number to move you around the track. The heat in this game is represented by cards to flood your deck, causing you to have fewer options as the game goes along. You can gain heat by pushing your engine around curves or pushing your engine at times when you shouldn't. When it comes to car racing, I think Heat beats out all of the other ones for me. Thunder Road Vendetta is a fighting game. Heat is a racing game. The only reason it's not in my top 10 is that I haven't played the physical version enough. I played it a lot on BGA. In fact, I'm like in 2 games right now. Add me as a friend on BGA if you haven't. But if I get this to table enough, I think everything about this game, how simple it is, how accessible it is, will get it into my top 10. This game has given me so many memories, permanent memories that I reflect on all the time, and it's Skull. Look, I don't even have to hold it. And if you haven't heard of Skull, Skull is a game that was originally played in bars. In this game, you have 4 coasters. One of them is a skull, the other 3 are roses. Each player has one in the middle to start, and on your turn, you simply add another coaster to the pile, or you start a bid by calling out a number. The number you're calling is how many coasters you think you can flip over without revealing a skull. Thing is, if you win the bid, you have to flip over all of your coasters first. And then, one by one, start picking coasters until you either reveal a skull and lose, or reveal all roses and get your first point. First player to get 2 points wins the whole game. It's difficult to explain why Skull is so fun. It just is. Some people would say there's no strategy to it, but I think there is. I couldn't tell you what that is, but I feel like there is one. Doesn't mean I'm good at it. But the reason it didn't reach my top 10 is because this leans towards more of a social play type of game. And while I did have a social deduction game in my top 10, that game has social deduction and other things going on, whereas Skull isn't social deduction, it's a social game. But once you get past that, it's simply just a social game. It's a great game, but so close to my top 10, but not quite on it. The last two games on my honorable mention list of 2024 are on the same shelf right next to each other. The first game I'm going to mention is Concordia. This is a peaceful strategy games where the cards are doing all the heavy work for you. Throughout the game, you're buying new cards that will unlock new abilities, but they're also all the points you get because they're multipliers based on the things you've gathered throughout the game. So Concordia is a game about planning, and I was planning on putting it on my top 10 list, but it didn't quite make it because I think I need to experience it at different player counts. Recently, I played the 6-player version and we did a 3 versus 3. This game ended up taking forever, and while it's still pretty fun, taking forever in a game, well, it's a strange thing to say whenever it comes to games that are great. It's like going into a movie that just takes too long, like 3-hour movie. It's a great movie, but it's just too long. Whereas you can binge 9 30-minute episodes of a TV show that takes way longer than 3 hours, and all of a sudden, that's okay. But this is a great game. I don't need to talk about TV show binging or anything to tell you that Concordia is a great game. And it's somewhere in my 11 and 20. We'll figure all that out. Probably later this year sometime. I can keep the camera right where it is because we're moving on to my fifth honorable mention, which is Tyrants of the Underdark. This one survived from the last honorable mentions list. It's still there. It's a great game if we're talking about the first edition. But let me tell you how the game plays first. In this game, it's a deck builder, but it's also an area control game. You're using the cards you recruit on the board to move your armies to influence these different cities. And the game has this wonderful theme of D&D, which is a nice familiar theme. I still like getting this game out, but I have the first edition, and it's lovely. But then they came out with the second edition, where they cheaped out on a lot of parts. That really isn't a factor as to why I enjoy the game. The game is just a fun game. I really like deck builders. I really like area control, and this has combined them together. Production issues is probably why it's kept off of my top 10. I really hope Tyrants of the Underdark finds a good printer that will take care of it, bring it to a deluxe edition possibly. There's Kickstarter nowadays. Let the people do the talking. I think it's important that we keep talking about these games that we love because it's how new players, new board gamers, possibly you, find your new favorite board game. And my favorite board games don't have to be your favorite board games. You're going to find your own favorite board games. Maybe someday you'll make a list about it. And you'll have your own top 10 and your own honorable mentions. And when that time comes, I'll be listening and possibly introducing myself to your top 10 and maybe some of my new favorite games. But until then, the box is closed.